So the Creed, Symbolum Nicenum, we've talked before about how this whole work, the B minor Mass, was collated by Bach with some new music and a lot of music which was reworked as a kind of summary and for posterity and for his own religious faith as a kind of summary of all that he'd done and was capable of. The symmetry of the work we've talked about before, and especially the use of the number 3. So we've had the earlier part of the work which Bach called the Missa, which was from 1733. It was first published or put together. Bach himself actually collected this work in 4 volumes when he kind of gathered it in the last couple of years of his life, 2 or 3 years of his life. He collected it in 4 volumes. And this is, the first one is the Missa, which is the Kyrie and all the movements of the Gloria. So there are 3 movements of the Kyrie and 9 movements of the Gloria, 3 times 3. And the Credo was from much later, collected a lot of this music. Some of it's pre-existing, but there is some new music also from around the sort of late 1740s, collected either just immediately before he put the whole piece together, or especially written in a couple of cases. And again, the Creed is in 9 movements, like the Gloria, the same structure, this kind of symbolic number of the Trinity, and mathematically palindromic form, a kind of symmetrical form. So the central movement of the Credo is the Crucifixus, and that's obviously the central thing of the whole work in a way. This kind of use and symbolic putting of the crucifixion at the centre. So we've got 3 groups of 3 movements, and that's very strongly reflected in how the work is structured in this case. So this week we're going to look at the first 3 movements of the Symbolum Nicenum, 2 of which are choral, and they're both tricky. So what I've done is to link, just before the videos of these pieces, link to the Cyberbase website, and do have a look at this. These are tricky pieces to sing, and it's worth doing them slowly and calmly with your part isolated. Even if you think you know it pretty well, I think it's worth doing, especially the second Credo. So I've included those links below so it's easy to find. You can adjust the speed, so you need to scroll down to the second, the top bit of the page is the first section, the Missa, and then the second section, which is just below the grey play thing, which looks like things you might have seen on iTunes or whatever. You need to click the link for your voice part, and then you can go back upwards slightly to choose slower or faster as it plays, just to slow it down. It does change the pitch, but that's no bad thing. So the first movement of the Creed, the Credo 1, so this is on page 114 for most people. This uses as its basis the intonation that you'll commonly hear whenever you hear, if you hear choirs sing Renaissance polyphony or other mass settings. This is the kind of traditional intonation, Credo in unum Deum. So Bach has put this into a rhythm and metricized this and built this piece all around that. Again, we've got a slight interesting mixture of that old style, bearing in mind that this is the work as a whole, the B minor Mass, is a collection of everything that he is capable of. A big thing for Bach is the old style and the new, and that's quite important on some of his organ pieces as well. That he has this old style handed down to him by earlier German composers, and the sort of newer styles, the dance styles, and of course he wrote a lot for harpsichord and things like the French suite and the German suites. You've got this newer style of music. Here we've got a bit of a mixture. So you've got this plain song tune in slow notes. So that's very kind of traditional and straightforward. Then, but against that, you've got this bouncy, rather boppy bass line. Which runs this crotchet movement, which runs through the whole movement and really gives the feeling of the kind of lightness and joy. So the effect together is kind of a mixture of old and new. So you've got this kind of fusion of styles there. And as ever, he's very clever with the structure. It's not a fugue, it's a counterpoint. So what happens is he starts, the orchestration is rather simple. I've got the score here, and I'll try and show you. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Although the structure is just, you've got 5 voice parts and the bass line and 2 violin parts. I don't know if you can see that. So you can see, although that's a full orchestral score, it's relatively simple and quite clear, even when it starts getting busier. So the texture is very clear. We've talked about how tricky it is to write in 5 parts. We've got, it's actually a 9-part texture here. We've got the 5 voice parts, 2 violins, the bass and some harmony. So it's really 8 parts with some chords. So he introduces this cantus firmus idea, 3 bars apart, tenors start, and then the basses come in, and then 2 bars later, the altos come in. 3 bars after that, the sopranos come in. 3 bars after that, the altos come in. And then 2 bars after that, the violin 1 comes in, and then 3 bars after that, the second violin comes in. And those are all starting either on an E or starting on an A. And of course, then you have, as with a fugue, a kind of counter melody, which isn't strict, as it would be in a fugue. For the tenors, for example, we've got this line which we worked so hard on getting the second note right on the In Unum Deum. So they have that, but the basses go right down to a D. So after they've gone Credo in unum Deum, they go down to In Unum Deum, which is a third lower than the tenors have. So he's being a bit free with how that works. Then what happens later on is that at bar 18, we get again the cantus firmus tune, the plain song tune is introduced a tone higher. The tenors, always wanting to be higher, have it a bit higher, bar 18. And once again, we've got the same gap between the parts coming in. So we've got 3 bars later, the altos come in on a B. So again, these are all on F sharps and Bs. So the altos come in on a B in bar 21. And then the pattern is broken. The 3 bars later, the second sopranos come in on an E this time in bar 24. And we're gradually, as the piece builds up, the entries are getting closer together. So we have the 2 soprano parts, the seconds come in bar 24, and then the first come in just a bar and a half after that. So it's the seconds, and there's the first. And he's cleverly worked the rhythm to make sure that all fits together, and regardless of what key they're in or what pitch, he's chosen something which works. So then the violins take up the same idea in bar 29. You can see that in the piano part, starting on a B. And then the first violin. So he's using the same kind of intervals that work with these parts being combined. Then the basses set up the kind of beginning of the end. Basses, you're causing the end of the piece. Really, it's common practice that a lot of pieces all through music have what we call dominant pedal, which is where you have a piece or some kind of pedal where you've got, if it's coming to an end, so you've got a piece in D major, you might have this pedal idea where you have so you'd finish a piece in D major normally with a cadence, in other words, a finishing. And one way of introducing a sign, a symbol that the end is about to come, is by hanging on to that penultimate chord. So that's kind of what's going on here. We've got the basses holding on to this long A in bar 33. Of course, the piece is not actually finishing, it's going on to the next piece, but we get that same feeling. So the basses have the same tune in bar 33, just with a really much longer first note. And then it all gets a bit more fun at bar 34, because what we have is again, it all works around the same cantus firmus, the intonation melody. The second sopranos and the altos are in sixths. And actually the basses are then already going with they start early, but then they kind of catch up. So there they go. And then just to make things even more fun, Bach introduces the first sopranos, who are just a crotchet, a minim one beat behind the altos and second sopranos. So the altos and second sopranos come in. So you get that kind of idea of this, the idea of the melody being closer together as the piece goes, which builds up the tension. Then the last people to get this melody, again, one beat apart, one minim beat apart, are the two violins. And they have this same idea. They get even closer and even higher. And that's the last iteration of that melody in this movement before we go on to the next one. So please do sing through the learning files for this one, unless you're already note perfect on it. And then see you in a minute for the next movement.